on the gradual resumption of certain religious activities. The coronavirus pandemic has had a profound impact on all South Africans. Our Minister of Health today advised me that we now have over 20,000 people in our country who are infected and close to 500 people who have lost their lives. This continues to cause great distress amongst all of us as citizens of South Africa. At the same time, we are thankful that more than 11,000 people have recovered from coronavirus. Families are struggling to make ends meet. Businesses have been badly hit, and some have even had to shut down. People have lost their jobs, and sources of income have dried up. Because of the restrictions under the nationwide lockdown, we've been unable to move around, to go to work, to study, to meet friends and family, and to attend religious services. Yet, even at this time of crisis, we have cared for each other, shown compassion and solidarity, and have sought to alleviate the plight of the most vulnerable in our country. This pandemic has also taken a toll on us emotionally and spiritually. It has shaken our sense of well-being and security. Many of us are anxious and fearful of both the present and the future. As a nation, we have a responsibility to respond to this aspect of the pandemic with as much effort and urgency as we have responded to the health crisis and as we have acted to relieve the economic and social effects on our people. We have a responsibility to also take care of the spiritual, psychological, and emotional well-being of all South Africans. In helping our nation to cope with these difficulties, we acknowledge and welcome the call that has been made by our religious leaders for a day of prayer. Prayer will comfort and strengthen us as we continue to confront this pandemic. When I addressed the nation on Sunday, I said that we've been discussing with the religious leaders who have made a number of proposals around a gradual resumption of some religious activities and the manner in which they would like to exercise their functions. The National Coronavirus Command Council discussed the proposals put to us by our religious leaders and has determined that we should accede to the proposals put forward in accordance with certain norms and standards. South Africans are a people of deep faith. Our faith is what has seen us through many dark times and has sustained us. We understand the great importance that the closure of places of worship have had on members of the faith community, and that this has worsened the distress of communities who are unable to worship in congregation. Our leaders in the faith community provide spiritual guidance, care, and counseling to millions of South Africans, and we are immensely grateful that from the beginning of our task in addressing this health crisis, they have stood with us and provided advice, guidance, support, and encouragement from the very beginning. The faith community is an integral part of South African life and has made a great contribution in the fight against the coronavirus. With our focus now on enabling our people to cope during this crisis and rebuilding our shattered economy, as well as assisting individuals and businesses whose livelihoods have been negatively impacted, we recognize and appreciate the important role the faith community has played in the provision of spiritual support and social relief. Much of it has been done under extremely difficult circumstances with minimal resources. In such a time of crisis, the noble values that are shared by all faith communities have truly come to the fore. Values of charity and doing good works, of helping the needy, of feeding the hungry, and caring for the sick. Although the nationwide lockdown has curtailed the activities of our faith-based organizations, we have strongly felt their presence. They have helped to keep our spirits up. They have encouraged us to remain focused. Above all, they have consistently reminded our people that the lockdown regulations are in place for the common good and the welfare of all of us. As we now prepare to move to coronavirus alert level 3, on the 1st of June, we recognize and appreciate their deep desire to return to their duties, to serve their communities, and to serve society. After consideration, following consultation with our religious leaders, we have therefore determined that as part of the regulations for alert level 3, the current restrictions on congregational worship will be eased in a carefully measured way. Places of worship may reopen subject to strict restrictions which are absolutely necessary if we are to prevent infections from rising in accordance with norms and standards that will be set out in the regulations. Churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, and other recognized places of worship may resume services, but these will be limited in size to 50 people or less, depending on the space available. Social distancing will have to be observed, and all worshippers and participants will have to wear face masks in line with the current regulations. All religious organizations must put protocols in place for, among other things, thoroughly cleaning and sanitizing places of worship before and after services. Our faith communities must ensure that any religious rituals that carry even the slightest possibility of exposing worshippers to risk should be avoided, and that where they form an essential part of religious practice, that sanitation is paramount. Our religious leaders will be recognized as essential religious frontline workers for purposes of spiritual counseling to members of their faith organizations. Religious leaders will continue to officiate at funerals of no more than 50 people. Our religious leaders occupy positions of immense trust and authority in our communities and need to play a proactive role in raising the level of public awareness around the coronavirus in their services, in faith communication groups, and through their pastoral work and activities. We welcome the offers that our religious leaders have made to make their facilities available for the fight against coronavirus by providing additional space for school lessons, for quarantine, for screening and testing, and for places of shelter for survivors of gender-based violence. This we are grateful for. This new phase of managing the coronavirus as a constant in our daily lives will be in many respects more difficult. It demands vigilance, and it will continue to demand sacrifices of all of us. The social distancing and hygiene measures that are in place under the lockdown will have to continue way into the future and cannot be abandoned or compromised. Let us continue to be guided by the overriding principle of doing whatever it takes to preserve life. Our faith-based organizations have shown in both word and deed their commitment to the national effort to combat this virus. We will continue to engage with various constituencies across society around their concerns and deal with the suggestions they are making to move safely towards easing various restrictions. Throughout this difficult time, we have remained firm and united. Yet we know the race is far from won, and that the collective energies and efforts of all our people will be needed now as never before. I therefore urge all South Africans to heed the call of the leaders of our various faith communities for a national day of prayer, which they have delineated as Sunday, the 31st of May, when we will once again come together to pray for the healing of our land and the protection of our people. On this day, wherever we may be, I call upon all of us to turn our thoughts to all those who have been affected by this pandemic, to also turn our thoughts to the families of those who have lost their loved ones. On this day, we should remember those who are working to keep us safe, those who are suffering and grieving. Whether you are a person of faith or not, there is one belief that unites us, and that is our belief in South Africa, in its people, in their courage, and in their ability to overcome even the greatest of tribulations. As we worked tirelessly to heal the divisions of the past, so too will our united action bring us healing from this pandemic. May God continue to bless South Africa and protect her people. I thank you once again.
That was President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking live in Hyde Park in Johannesburg. And sure, this will be unexpected for many. The National Command Council, he says, is acceding to the suggestion of religious leaders to gradually resume religious activities. So we will see churches, mosques, other institutions reopening, but under strict guidelines. So he did outline those limited to 50 people or less. Depending on the space, and we'll speak to various religious leaders shortly. What do they think of these guidelines around religious activity resuming? All to wear face masks. There's a need to clean and sanitize before and after, and no religious rituals should be conducted that could put anyone in danger. He also welcomed the call by religious leaders for a national day of prayer, which is this Sunday, the 31st, calling on all South Africans to think about those who have lost lives, who have family members, friends who have been affected by COVID-19. And this is interesting. I mean, he says the toll has been emotional and spiritual as well as physical and, of course, economic on many South Africans. Let's get some reactions now. We're joined on the line by Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. Archbishop, thank you for being with us. Your response to what the President said tonight? Archbishop Makgoba, can you hear me?
I can hear you. So sorry, somebody's talking in your studio.
We'll try and limit that interference. I presume you heard what the President had to say. Did you expect this? Do you welcome it?
We want to lay down our lives for them and for South Africa. But I agree that without the spiritual element and the prayer element in our country, South Africa is not whole. And so we accept that with gratitude.
What about maybe non-religious people or even religious people who would say, can't this put many at risk?
There are various unknowns about the coronavirus. We don't know how long it will be with us. It may take very long if one reads the history of pandemics. If one looks at I'm so sorry, somebody in your studio is just talking to my ears. But
all right, sorry, Archbishop, please carry on. We'll try and fix that. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. If we look at the history of the pandemics, if we don't know how long it will be with us. We don't know when will the vaccine be found, but we are people of faith. We believe that we cannot be in lockdown in perpetuity. We just need to take baby steps. We need to care. We need to be vigilant. We need to ensure that the framework that we've put for ourselves actually work. Now, those people who are not of faith also need to be respected because they have the right as South African citizens. Now, some of our parishioners and our people who are scared will not be stigmatized or forced to go to church. But it's going to be a question of really negotiating, like we normally do in the church space, and incorporating each other, but remembering that we don't worship the church, we don't worship ourselves, we worship a God who is bigger than each one of us.
Are the restrictions workable, Archbishop? Everyone wearing face masks, sanitization, no religious rituals that can put people in danger, and the main one, just 50 people. What about very big churches?
We have been doing funerals during lockdown of 50 people, and so far so good. We have not had at least reported anybody that became positive from those funerals. We have started some protocols during that time. We are different as churches. We have mega churches, we have small churches, we've got urban churches, we've got rural churches. And we hope that we will find a way, like we have already started doing in the SABC policy guidelines and norms and standards. We will find ways like we have done. I mean, the church, if you go back to where it started as small house groups in Asia Minor and with Paul. So we will go back to that. And even during lockdown, people met through Facebook, Zoom, they improvise. We will have to improvise. We will have to work within the laws and find a way of soaking South African prayer, because our main aim is not to have numbers and boast of our numbers. Our main aim is to ensure that the spiritual welfare of South Africa is cared for, whether you're of faith or no faith. Let me make an example. We run schools, we run theological colleges, we run NGOs, and we run a number of programs. We have hospital chaplains, we have school chaplains. Those were in a quandary when schools were opening. They were saying, do we stay home because we are priests looking after the welfare of children? So this opening up of places of worship will ensure that once they have done their pastoral ministry in those schools and hospitals, they can come back to give thanks to God and be nurtured in order to go back and serve the world.
All right. Thank you so much for your reaction, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. And on the line, I believe we are now joined by Bishop Malusi Mpolwana, the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. Bishop, the Council of Churches, I believe, gave input. Did the President give you what you asked for?
Well, I think it is not just the South African Council of Churches. All religious organizations were at one on the appeal for the availability of spiritual ministrations to the South African public in the context of the anxieties of coronavirus. And so it is not just the SACC, just about all of us were saying the same thing. The only thing that the SACC said maybe that is different is that the member churches offered their properties to the authorities to be used for, in case of victims of gender-based violence that need to be evacuated, maybe spaces for quarantine and extra space for classrooms. Those are the extra things that the SACC talked about. But otherwise, all the religious organizations had the same issues. The main thing really was, if we can conduct funerals with 50 persons, really, why can't we worship as 50? And it seems to make sense. Why can't we have weddings as 50? Now I remember particularly the chief rabbi making this very strong appeal for weddings, that, you know, to postpone weddings is just not appropriate for young people. So all of these things are pastoral things that we have been talking about, and we're grateful for that.
The President didn't mention weddings, so according to your understanding, that will also be allowed with 50 people as a religious ceremony of sorts.
Basically, the services, the administrations that the churches would want to do can be done within the number of 50. Yeah. And of course, the South African Council of Churches spent some time over the last 3 weeks saying, if there were to be an opening, what would be the kinds of things that we would want to do in our churches to make sure that we are COVID safe, because the churches have a very great responsibility to make sure that they save lives. We are not going to fool around with the virus. We want to make sure that people come safely into our congregations and can go away safely. And so for that reason, we've got a set of measures that we have proposed in our norms and standards that say, instead of having one large congregation, we can then break up the congregation over a number of days during the week, and maybe using the alphabet or using blocks, that area, that kind of thing. Maybe the elderly between 55 and above can worship by themselves. So there will be all kinds of things. We have prepared all of this, which is now going to be available in our congregations so that everyone can know how best to manage this environment.
Yeah. The lockdown, just tell us about the effects for many ordinary South Africans, those who maybe couldn't go online and attend a church service via Zoom or watch on YouTube. How have they been affected, and how will this change things? I'm thinking also of services that are held out in the open as well.
That is by far the large majority of South African Christians. By far, I'm talking about Christians, by far the largest majority are those people that have no access to the electronics. And many people that worship under the trees, people that worship in homes, people that worship in classrooms, others worship under the trees. Now, those people were not able to exercise their collective spirituality because they could not leave their homes. They could not be anywhere without a permit. And that has had a huge impact. And I remember one of the leaders of our Council of African Independent Churches who was saying in the apostolic tradition that he belongs to, that this is Bishop Nana, that they feel guilty. There is a kind of a spiritual guilt that they have, that they have not been able to exercise what they are supposed to do at Easter. And so all these sacrifices, if you think about ZCC and the millions of people that gather there, all of this has been sacrificed. Now, at the very least, that can begin to come together. And I believe this is not about buildings. It's about places of worship. And that means if you worship under the tree, now you can go to your favorite tree one more time, but keeping social distance, but also ensuring that the numbers remain within that 50 and not break the law in this regard.
He also said that religious leaders will be categorized as essential workers as they care for congregants. So it sounds like religious leaders can now go into the homes of congregants who are suffering in any way. Do you understand it that way? And will that make a difference? I mean, we know people are suffering with gender-based violence. The tensions of people forced to lock down together have been very high.
We shall await the actual unpacking of the regulations. The church leaders, by the way, of the South African Council of Churches meet every week on Tuesday with a COVID update, COVID watch meeting. But when there is going to be an announcement by the minister responsible for these regulations, Minister Dlamini Zuma, we all suspend everything to watch. And I think I have to say this maybe at this point, that we are distressed by all the insinuations about her when she does her job, because it undermines the regulations and it leads to what might actually become a danger, an endangerment of people, because they undermine what is announced by a Minister of State with the responsibility to manage the regulations. We would like to really say, please, just stop this sniping. It's not helping our environment. Yeah. But anyway, what then happens is that we will await the unpacking of the regulations related to this and how we are to understand it. But the important thing to say is that we have said to our own ministers that nobody is immune from this. And of course, it means nobody is going to say that I, as Malusi Mpumlwana, am not coronavirus positive. And for that reason, I put on a mask to protect the person that I'm going to be talking to. We expect that because we do not want our churches to be gateways to the grave, nor do we want our ministers to be agents of death instead of health.
Finally, Bishop, and perhaps very quickly, if you don't mind, you don't want police to have to come in and break up religious services. How do you see this playing out if some flout the rules? Is there any form of self-regulation?
Well, as I said, we spent the last 2 weeks, in fact, even before the announcement by the president that there would be level 3, we began to say we are restive. When we started suspending our worship, we did not anticipate it would be this long. But when they said it's going to go on again until end of April, we began to say it looks like this is going to be long. We better start thinking, because we would like to strongly recommend some form of return. Can we start talking about what this might mean? And in that context, we then began to lay out some of the things that we think are important. And amongst those things is the whole question of ensuring that there isn't any everyone that comes to our churches is protected, and we prevent any possibility that they can be infected. We know that police will have to do their job. But we would hope that because we have declared our own self-regulation mechanisms, there will be no reason for any one of them to find anything that it's very untidy, it is very unseemly, it is very unfortunate that you might find law enforcement officers breaking, I mean, that image of them breaking into churches, breaking into mosques, it is so unfortunate in South Africa. I would hope that all of us will take responsibility to make sure that we keep within the law, but also we protect the safety of our people, both in health and in every way possible.
All right, thank you for your time and your response. Bishop Malusi Mpolwana, the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. We continue to get reaction from religious leaders to the announcement tonight by the President that all religious institutions will be allowed to gradually resume activity. That's from the 1st of June under the regulations for Lockdown 3. I'm joined now by Maulana Ibrahim Bam, the Secretary General of Jumatul Ulama. Mr. Ibrahim Bam, thank you for being with us. Your response to what the President had to say.
Well, firstly, we must, from our congregation and from the Jamiatul Ulama, we would like to welcome this move of the President. And as the President had said, the faith communities are an integral part of South Africa. And we are a multi-religious society in our country. We have different religious groups. And it is heartening to see that it was the collective approach of the religious communities that has made the President make this particular easing of regulations in going back towards congregational prayers. We welcome it, and we hope that we will be able to deal effectively with the conditions that have been laid down.
The same question that I asked a church leader, what about big mosques? What about big congregations? How do you plan to deal with this number of 50 as a maximum?
Well, there's no doubt whatsoever that this will be challenging. However, given the importance of prayer, given the importance of remembrance of the Almighty, you know, in our holy book, the Quran, it is made mention, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub." In the remembrance of the Almighty, does heart find contentment and satisfaction. And while we all know that the remembrance of the Almighty can be done individually, can be done in the homes, can be done in solitude, there is a certain degree of importance, emphasis, and there's a certain degree of an environment that is created by a congregational prayer. And as such, while this particular numbers with regard to 50 will be challenging, and we do welcome it. We also welcome it because of several reasons. One is the importance of prayer, and the other is also that we cannot be complacent. While we are thankful to the Almighty, we are grateful to the Almighty, that comparative to many other countries in the world, the numbers, and we're not trying to regard any number as insignificant. Even one death is not insignificant. However, comparative to many other countries, in South Africa, we have managed to flatten the curve to an extent. And therefore, while we are going to welcome the going back for congregational prayers to the mosque and other religious places of worship, we also need to be careful with regard to the restrictions so that we cannot be complacent that it becomes a means of the further transmission of the virus. Yeah. So while we welcome it, we do regard it as challenging. We really welcome the aspect of being able to pray because of the importance of prayer.
Also, the same question then, could there be some form of self-regulation around that challenge of the 50, around the other restrictions of wearing masks, sanitizing, etc.?
Well, there is no doubt whatsoever that religion, amongst its many other benefits, you know, we know that faith gives us hope in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of despondency, in the midst of challenges, and in the midst of difficulty. Now, when you look at that particular role of faith, then surely faith should also encompass the necessary discipline and responsibility to be able to comply with regulations. If faith is such an important role and plays such an important role to give us hope in the midst of such great challenges, then surely faith should also be able to give us the necessary discipline and responsibility to adhere what has been put forward by the country and by the regulations of the country.
Finally, we've seen cases where police break up gatherings. I mean, explain the challenges that Muslims have faced not being able to gather. And what does this change mean for your midday prayers on Fridays, for general mosque activity as well?
You know, when initially, when the lockdown started off, there was a regulation with regard to 100 people to be in the congregation. We know that there were certain disputes and there were certain difference of opinion from the medical personnel at that time. But initially, there was a regulation of 100. And I must admit that while we found it challenging, the mosque in our area, in our regions, within the country, they abided by it. And they went the extra mile to be able to follow that particular type of regulation. And while I do admit that it will be challenging, I'm also confident from our community that we will be able to abide by this with the discipline and responsibility that it entails.
All right, thank you very much. That was Maulana Ibrahim Bam, the Secretary General of Jamiatul Ulama. And we're now joined on the line by Mary Klook, the President of the Jewish Board of Deputies. Ms. Klook, thank you very much for being with us. Does the Jewish Board of Deputies welcome the President's announcement tonight?
Thank you so much. We're very respectful and deeply cognizant of the President's challenges when it comes to gatherings of people and the response that we're all hoping to be able to gather together and pray as communities, but conflicted with the fact that obviously gatherings have been the source of many outbreaks and are of deep concern at the stage that our country is in with regard to the virus. So our community is obviously cautious about the fact that we're going to be doing everything we can and whatever it takes to preserve life. And we'll be working, you know, as the President said, this new phase of managing COVID in our daily lives demands vigilance. And this reconfiguring how we will work together with the Chief Rabbi Goldstein and the Union of Orthodox Synagogues to ensure that the synagogues are places of comfort and source of spiritual and emotional support, but are not going to in any way challenge this virus any further.
Ms. Klook, forgive me if you touched on this. I lost sound for a little bit, but I know the viewers were listening to you. Dealing with the limit of 50 for the big shuls, how will you do that?
So I think that is always going to be a challenge to manage numbers. And that will have to be a conversation that we'll have with our leadership, as I said, with the Chief Rabbi Goldstein and the Union of Orthodox Synagogues, but taking into consideration support and advice that we've had from the scientific community, who've been helping us enormously with managing how we deal with this virus from the outset. And, you know, the managing of not sharing prayer books or sanitizing and masks, as the President already said, limiting numbers, staggering services. Those are conversations and important discussions that we're going to be having as community leadership to ensure the safety of each and every one of our congregants and our fellow South Africans.
Is there a tension at all? Because I haven't heard the President or any government ministers sort of saying you can now visit family and friends. And we know that the Friday nights, Shabbat, such a crucial religious observance for many Jewish people, but that is done in homes and you want to do it with your family and friends. Any tension there for you?
I think there's always been a somewhat of a sadness that we haven't been able to participate in these activities, but with the full understanding of the importance of maintaining social distance. And obviously, within families, there are small children and grandparents who are that much more vulnerable. So there has been, as you know, we've been through this COVID lockdown through our very important festival of Passover. And for many people who living on their own, it was incredibly tough. But I think the understanding that rushing back to reconnect is not the solution. This lockdown has been explained very carefully over many months by accomplished scientists in our country, that this was a process of getting the country ready, and this easing back to some kind of new normal needs to be taken incredibly carefully and through the consideration of science. And each one of us, every individual within the faith-based communities and every South African is responsible for how successful we are in combating this virus.
Finally, do you, as the Jewish Board of Deputies, support the call for prayer on Sunday? Will you be taking part in that?
I'm absolutely sure we will. So I think it's a wonderful idea to come together as a country, no matter what faith or creed, is an absolutely wonderful idea, and the opportunity to come together, as the President said, to pray for those people who have been affected and those people who are protecting us on the front line is a wonderful initiative. We do support that very much.
All right, thank you very much. Mary Cluck, the President of the Jewish Board of Deputies. So that was a range of religious leaders. Thank you for being with us. United in welcoming the announcement tonight by President Cyril Ramaphosa that religious services can be held, but only 50 people may attend. We take a short break. We'll be back with lots more.